Are you enjoying Game Bar? I don't want to answer that right now. I'm doing a podcast. Anyway, I think it's
Starting.
recording, so yay! We arrive. Welcome everyone to
Yay.
another podcast. Hopefully this one you can hear because I've had audio issues for a while, but I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed and watch the recording afterwards, and hopefully you can hear. In case you can, welcome. I'm joined here by my one brand new guest for my new podcast. I'm going to introduce Mr. Imagine. I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a good weekend as well. I think most of South Africa had a pretty good weekend.
Yeah. If you didn't have a good weekend, it's because you don't support South Africa.
Yeah, or you've just been in a coma or whatever. I don't know, because honestly, like, we won the World Cup. We're doing like World Burn cricket. Our petrol price is going down. There's a lot of good things happening all of a sudden, which is nice. Nice for a
Yeah.
change.
All positive things. And we just
All
got a public holiday, a fake public holiday. So,
yeah. Well, sorry for all the school children. It's not gonna affect you guys, but hey, us who work, we're gonna enjoy it very much.
yeah.
Anyway, so
That's all
as you can
Friday.
tell from the title of the whole thing, the topic for today is cutscenes. It's our little vista, into our whole video gaming world. We have a nice little power when it comes to cutscenes. It kind of blurs the lines of our media, especially when it comes to like movies and crossing the streams and stuff like that. But it has a great ability to bind the stories of gaming together, either when it's coming to progressing a narrative, giving you plot points, climaxes, conclusions, whatever it might be. Cutscenes have a great way of displaying and portraying media uh, in a unique style that gaming also does. But yeah, it's been with us now for a long while. It's just interesting, obviously, that at some point a game dev sat down and said, "What if I want to make a movie in my video game?" That was essentially, I think, the question they asked. And it's
I'm sure
interesting.
that happened like so long ago, though.
It did indeed. But then again, the thing is, you have to be a bit more. I want to say a little bit more like liberal, or have a little bit of more liberty to kind of like define a cutscene. Because if I ask you the question, how do you define a cutscene? What would you say? Like what is a cutscene to you?
To me, a cutscene is basically something like almost a non playable shift from one piece of the game to another.
Yeah, like more or less. I think it's literally like
Yeah.
if it's if it's basically doing something where you're maybe just watching instead of playing and you're taking in either a story, narrative, or something is happening and you're observing
Mm.
it and it does something to the game. I think that's a cutscene. Like
Yeah.
it can have multiple purposes, do multiple things depending on the genre, but I think to put it as basic as possible, I think it's something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got our definition down, and you said it was old. So how old do you think it is?
Ooh. I don't know, but I can think back to like PlayStation 1 games having cutscenes.
Yeah,
How old is PlayStation 1 now?
90,
94?
yeah, 94. So that's almost 30 years now. 30 years next year.
Yeah, 30 years. I'm sure there must have been some before that, but
It was before that. Like even how do I put it? Like if I were to even define like a proper cutscene we know today, preceded even that before that. And if, like I said, if we want to be more liberal, have a little bit of a more free think of what a cutscene is even before that. In fact, if like we go very loose on the definition, the first cutscene is older than save files, older than health bars, older than arcade gaming or commercial video gaming. Like it's older than Pong by about 12 years. So that's 1966.
older than Pong.
Older than the actual first apparent video game itself, which kind of baffles belief, but it was interesting because obviously when you think about the
What is
60s,
it?
so yeah, that's like we're gonna get down to. There's like that's what I said. You have to kind of
Yeah,
have a very open mind about this because we're talking about the 60s and the 70s here. This is even before arcade gaming. All your
yeah.
gaming was like done on a mainframe, and obviously for those who don't know really When I say mainframe, I'm talking about an almost literal supercomputer that like the big businesses had or universities had. This was like a machine that was just supposed to run for accounting purposes or calculation purposes, whatever it may be. But like I said, no one's having this in their personal capacity. This was a machine that someone big was using for their resources. But employees obviously wanted to test out computing power and have a little bit of experimentation. So they started like making little games on it. For whatever purpose it may be. Maybe it's just they want to test like new software. Maybe they were trying to run some tests like the universities did. In our case, this game was called the Sumerian game. Now, the Sumerian game falls under a very specific subgenre called text-based adventure games. At that point in time, obviously, that was the big
Mhm.
norm. We now have very little, a few of them left really today. They are here and there, and they are presented very nicely. We have seen a few creative ones like come around. Like I think there's a really creative one, for example, it almost flips like a storybook. I cannot for the life of me remember the game's name, but like to progress through the
Nope.
game world, it like flips like a storybook, kind of like that. Um, and all that. But
But
the
it's
tech,
all text based.
yeah, yeah. No, but like text-based adventure games are obviously very popular because no processing power almost needed. I mean, all of your explanation is on screen. You give a choice to the player of where to go, left, right, up, whatever. It's usually through a cave, a dungeon, a maze, whatever it may be. All your information is on screen. It allows a lot of choices and matters and stuff like that. And obviously, directly inspired from D&D, the whole thing about like you take a party into a dungeon, you want to go find treasure, you want to go beat a boss, whatever. Like this was just a very easy way to get that in a game, and Sumerian game was no different. The actual concept of the Sumerian game came from IBM itself. IBM wanted to run a test to say, how can we use computing in schools to learn kids about stuff. And Sumerian game was one of the first experiments they ran on that. They wanted to see if what
Okay.
they could do that is there some sort of learning they can get into classrooms or whatever. So not really a lot of things, but the cutscene in question was literally there was an intro to the game where it would like be this panel of slides that come across the screen, but it would give you text and detail about the world. So basically doing a little bit of world building and admin right before the actual game starts. So
Did
I
you say
said
a panel of flies?
slides, like a PowerPoint almost.
Oh, oh, slides.
And I was like, no, it's not a screen of flies.
Wow, the first cutscene ever was a screen of flies.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a little bit weird for our dive into this. No, I can imagine a South African gamer having some sort of screen of flies or mosquitoes, given our current predicament of summer.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, basically a PowerPoint.
Okay.
It gives you a little bit of world building and did like explain the law, stuff like that. So that's it. Very loosely defined, but that is technically a cutscene. So that is our first one, and obviously now I'm very far from where we are now, but it was crucial. It was crucial because like it laid the foundation of like, okay, you can use a cutscene or some sort of form to explain your world. You didn't just have to make a game and people had to make it up in their head or figure it out as they go along. There was an actual way now to tell a lot of things of going around. But it's not popular. Like it wasn't popular at the time because it had a very to them at this point it had a very niche use. Obviously when we went into arcade and stuff like that, like think about arcade games. No kids going there, inserting their coin, and then watching a 10-15 minute cutscene before they play the actual game. There's no real
No.
point there. Like they want to get a high score or whatever and just try to
Want to
beat
kick
their
some butt,
friends.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's no point. So arcade games already very few and far between. Arcade games that like they thought they would make it like spice up a little bit and make it cute. So the first ones we really got around here is like Pac-Man did it, and Space Invaders did it like between levels. So once you like clear level, they'll like run a little mini cutscene like, oh, Pac-Man scampering around, getting chased by the ghost, or one of the Space Invaders like limping off the screen. Like they thought, no, that's a very cool little thing we can do. Not major, but it's just cool. We can just play around with our little sprites, our little graphical things on the screen.
Yeah. Gives you, like it does, it world builds for you, even though the Pac Man one is pretty basic, just a little Pac
Yeah,
Man.
Pac-Man
running
thingy running
from, but
around
it
or
like
whatever.
it gives them some character because the straight up game there's like no character there.
No, it's literally just Pac-Man's trapping a few ghosts, consuming them. Like the all-powerful Pac-Man, just killing everything in sight. Actually, but again, at this
Consume.
point, like when it comes to the arcade kids, this is like the first time they would probably see a cutscene. So I mean, it means a lot to them when you see your first cutscene because it is kind of special in the game. You did mention the PS1. Were those your first cutscenes? Like you remember seeing?
Well, I mean, yeah, those are the first that I can remember. But I mean, now that you bring up like Pac-Man and stuff, I do remember seeing Pac-Man once. Obviously, they just weren't very impactful because,
No, no, they were just like, oh, he's running around on the
yeah,
screen. Look at him scamper.
exactly, exactly.
No, I had
Um,
one, like, I remember when I played Pac-Man once, I think it was the Miss Pac-Man one, because it's like, the one on the screen was like, oh, they meet, and it's like, Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, like, oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm running away from ghosts. You? Yeah, same, and then they just go different directions. That was one. I think the ones I remember the fondest from when I was really small was my brother, had like I think the whole CD set of Half-Life. So it's like Half-Life,
mm,
Opposing Force, Team Fortress Classic, and another one, like the 4 CD set. And he played, I remember distinctly, even back then, the opening scene, I think, where like they in you get the 2 opening scenes. I think if you wake up as Gordon Freeman, you wake up in that Black Mesa facility slash hospital, whatever. The doctor kind of comes in. It's like sort of explaining or doing some exposition of what's going on. I can't quite remember, but I remember the scene and I was like, there are aliens running around. How are these people so calm? But that was like me as a 5-year old or something freaking out. And then the other one
yeah,
I think is in opposing force, obviously, because you're a soldier, like I think you have like a chopper crash and then like you fight the aliens at the beginning before you black out and wake up in the same Black Mesa facility or something like that. Very memorable cutscenes for me for some reason. Very well done as well.
I mean, Half-Life is,
Yeah, we
well
know
known
its
for
legacy by
making
now.
well done things.
No, it's true. Half-Life, scary how much stuff it's invented for gaming. I have mentioned Half-Life at least I think in 4 or 5 podcasts by now
Yeah,
on various topics. So it's honestly, but people know its legacy very well. So it's
yeah,
so I don't have
yeah.
to overstate that. But
No,
yeah, so these were kind of the fresh cutscenes when it comes to arcade gaming. Like I said, arcade gaming at that point, you saw it, but it wasn't really as what we said on PS1 or Half Life now. It wasn't at that point where it was like a memorable thing. It was there, not
yeah,
memorable.
exactly.
But yeah, we kind of came and went. It was just nice to see it go into a digital format and stuff. And yeah, it kind of came into the 80s where it really started to kind of take more shape, had a bit of a more kind of pronounced thing. And the biggest one really came from these sets of games called, I think it's called Laserdisc video games. Yeah, Laserdisc video games. They had this kind of unique quality to them that they would make these pre-rendered cutscenes, and basically it almost played out like an interactive movie. You'd watch the pre-rendered cutscenes, and then between points in the movie, you'd do controls to just follow it forward. So also not quite where we wanted to be yet, but it came to a
Although
very
those
yeah.
those weird movie where it was like actually filmed
Yes, it
and
was literally
then
like an episode. It felt like an episode of something, but like for some reason you had like minimal control of the character. Like it's almost like it was almost a precursor to a quick time event where it was literally like, oh, you're watching cutscene, and then
okay,
like you're prepping for something that's happening, and now you're just clicking a button or progressing or moving around or whatever. You had a lot of
okay,
those
not
actually, like in the older DVDs. Like I think of DreamWorks and stuff. I think they also had some of that, or the kids
mm-hmm.
shows. Literally, I remember like you'd insert one of the DVD discs, and you'd literally have your remote there, and you'd play on your remote, basically the choices or whatever.
And the guy standing there like this waiting
Yeah, he's just
just
waiting for
waiting.
your input. So those were literally the first ones. The Laserdisc video games in the 80s would do that. Very important though. It's just it wasn't fully realized, but it did open the valve just a little bit more for people to kind of get into it, especially the pre-rendered part. The pre-rendering of the cutscene
Mm.
was very crucial because it meant that the devs could say, okay, we could pre-render cutscenes all we like, and we can put them in any place in the game. And sure, it does take a lot of space and stuff, but the 80s were like when we were starting to get more memory and stuff like that. There were a
Yeah.
lot of more things in the 80s that we'll discuss now, but yeah, it was kind of people when they saw this back then it was like, oh, it's sorcery and stuff like that. So yeah, the formula did try to stick. There were a few more games in the 80s that started this. The very prominent ones, also because they're also going into more genres now in the 80s. So, like we've moved away from the 70s just being space shooters and typical
Yeah.
arcade things to more distinct genres. Like the RPGs came a little bit later, but stuff like point and click adventures started to come a little bit later. You also still got your adventure games, dungeon crawlers, uh, what they call the roguelite games or the rogue games at those points,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. They all still come together. But the two prominent ones that really followed through with this formula was Ninja Gaiden, which was a pretty popular
Oh
platformer back then.
yes.
Maniac Mansion, which was the point and click. But both of these kind of had a very interesting thing they did. They had this formula basically of why don't we use a cutscene in between pieces of gameplay, not only to kind of have variety, but also to move the plot forward. This simple
Yeah.
structure, obviously, we see everywhere now, but it was novel for the 80s. Like they said, you play a level basically. Once the level's done, before you move on to the next level, like what Pac-Man and them did, but the actual cutscene had weight now. It had
Yeah.
content now, essentially. So very important. Also, I think because of its novelty, our little friend Kojima also jumped on that because, for those who don't know, Hideo Kojima is a very cutscene loving man. If you've played his games, he's he makes
But he
movies,
makes
not games.
playable. He plays. Yeah. He makes playable movies. Exactly what I was gonna
Basically,
say.
like he's almost more towards the laser discs at this point. But like I said, he has a way with them. He's really good at them. So I
Yeah.
won't knock on him. But like yeah, his first game was called Snatches, which was released also in '87. Also like it was like a spy thriller type of thing, but he did it almost like in a comic book style panel, like where like it looked like the comic book style panel, like and a little bit of griminess, but it was also just a lot of cutscenes, cutscene heavy, some gameplay and stuff like that. But I thought it was very interesting. He loved the formula, obviously, of the cutscenes. But then we have to ask ourselves now, as I said, we started to see this more in the 80s. And I thought I would make a discussion out of it because I thought it was quite interesting to try and narrow it down. Obviously, there isn't really a right answer here because there are many reasons why it worked in the 80s. But if you
Mm.
had to try and like piece together, what do you think? Why in the 80s did we suddenly decide, oh yes, cutscenes is definitely going to be part of gaming?
Oh, why then? I don't know. I think that's just the time when the technology allowed for it to happen. You know.
Mm.
I
No, it's
mean,
a
if you look
yeah.
at how
No, you're
if
right.
you look at how games changed from the 70s to the 80s, you know, everything kind of, like you said, it started off as a text based thing in the 70s, and then arcades started coming through, and then you have more than just words, you kind of have more graphics to play with. And then I think those kind of graphics just got better, and then people were like, hey, why not, why not use some of this to help motivate the story?
I think that's also a very, very obviously important thing since you had now like we have a little bit of more variety. We have a little bit more of, I guess, creative freedom. We should try and express it
Mm,
more, stand apart.
yeah.
Because I also have it noted down here, like one of the big things was the video game crash of '83 was also around this time, which was obviously, if you like loosely read it, so the whole hullabaloo of like Atari made that really rotten ET game, which I think was also around this time. The whole thing about being buried in the desert, very interesting story to read. But yeah, the video game crash of '83 obviously happened because at this time a lot of the games coming out was literally the same, almost copies of each other at that point. And the problem was there wasn't really, like, almost all of them were just fixated on gameplay, and gameplay was the entire game. So you had a lot of games that played the same, charged full price, which, as we learned in the 80s, it was already expensive, and the inflation didn't really go all the way in the 2020s. It could have been way more expensive, but I mean, in the 80s, it was already really pricey. The games all played the same. You had so many home consoles that, like, they started to not to stand apart. We're not just talking PlayStation or Xbox. You had Atari, Sega, all the older ones, the Commando, whatever. There were a lot. So
Yeah.
all these home consoles, all these games that played the same, all these very pricey games, and everyone just at, like, almost in that quick sequence, it rapidly meant, like, that the game stock, the stock of video games was just coming down hard, and it crashed essentially. And I think maybe at that point the game devs sat down and said, right, we need to figure out more
We need
ways
to
to make
change
our
something.
yeah. And I think cutscenes played a factor in that, because with cutscenes you can express yourself more. It's not just about, oh, here's my game plan, you have to play it how you play it. A cutscene is actually like, you can live a story, you can
Yeah.
show off your skills a little bit. Like, I mean, if you had some good graphics or some good techniques of your game, you can show it off in a cutscene as well, and other stuff,
Yeah.
make memorable stuff. So I think that played a crucial part. The other one I also have down is, like, even though there were too many of them at the time, the actual advent of having a home console was also crucial to this. Like we said, with arcade games, there's no point in making cutscene because you're going to the arcade, you're putting some coins in a machine. The last thing I want to do is watch a cutscene now,
Yeah.
because obviously,
Waste some time.
especially at that time, you're probably there with your mom or your dad. They don't really want to sit there and wait for you like 2 hours or something because you're watching the freaking arcade machine cutscene.
Cutscenes.
Like, I want to go
Yeah.
home. Mom, I haven't played yet. I'm ready for my cutscene. So it was one of those things. You got a home console now. You can sit at home. You have all the time in the world to play it. So obviously they're sitting there. Oh, we can make our game longer. How can we make our game
Yeah.
longer? Maybe we should have a little bit of more cutscenes. Also, because you had a home console, people are starting to buy home consoles and they're starting to buy more copies of the game. You're not just selling the copies to arcades. You're selling the copies to actual people now with personal consoles and stuff like that and machines. So you're getting more money, more revenue. And what does more revenue mean? We have a bigger budget next time. With a bigger budget, we can do more stuff. So, like I said,
Yeah.
there's quite a few things like you can think about, but I think also a lot of genres at that time started to benefit off it. We said RPGs came in later. I think RPGs is probably one of the genres out there that probably benefits the most out of cutscenes, purely because
Well,
RPGs.
all the world building.
Yeah, exactly. Like RPGs, like the text-based adventure. Text-based adventure was obviously already one of the first ones to use some sort of cutscene, but the RPGs said we can use cutscenes as well. We're also based off of D&D. We also need to world build. We also have lore. We also have
Yeah.
whatever. We need to also somehow tell all this information to the person. And like a cutscene, just a very easy and convenient way of doing
Does
that.
that job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
does a job, and
I
that's
mean,
where.
another thing
Yeah,
that people even do today is if you put a 20-minute cutscene, now that you have the ability to sell it
yeah.
to people at home, and they've got all the time, you get selling that value for money because, like, my game is 5 hours long. Even if it's 3 hours worth of cutscenes, you tell
Mm.
them it's a 5-hour game, whereas the other game that costs the same price is only 2 hours. You're like, oh yeah, I want to keep my kids busy for 5 hours, so I'm gonna get the 5-hour one. Anytime they've
Mm.
just filled it up with longer cutscenes or whatever it is.
No, cutscenes did do that. Like, it's it's something that happens. I won't say if it's advantageous or disadvantageous, obviously, to us, the consumer or the game dev, but cutscenes did allow a lot of stuff, as you mentioned, that it contributes to game length, and you use the game length to obviously market it. You can also market it. That was I was also going to mention that point. You're also going to market it because, as I said, remember we were using pre-rendered cutscenes. Pre-rendered cutscenes, obviously, you rendered way beforehand. You had all the assets, all the sprites and stuff like that. It's not in the game engine itself. It's something completely apart. You have a pre-rendered cutscene, which, let's just be honest, it does look better than the gameplay. It almost always does. That's how a pre-rendered cutscene is supposed
Almost.
to work.
Yeah.
So, what would you do if you have a pre-rendered cutscene, especially also in the 80s, if you have a new way to market your game? You'd put it in a trailer, like they do as well now. They
Yeah.
say, look at our amazing game with these beautiful graphics, and there's a pre-rendered cutscene, And then
Yep.
like you didn't see in-engine footage until much later, or you don't see gameplay
Yep.
trailers until much later down the line when you've already built like a hype. That's also a marketing
Yeah.
thing they do nowadays, and whether that's their risk. As I said, we've seen that backfire before, but they still do it. So that's the power of
They still
cutscenes in a
do it.
way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what the 80s were. They were kind of like, okay, now we've got a ball rolling, and we've got something to work on, to build on, or whatever. And the 90s rolled around, and we started to see some also really awesome. In my opinion, obviously before we get to the modern cutscene where it's like almost everything is a damn movie at this point, I think the 90s for me is almost where it starts to shift towards a more where it blurs the line between movies and video games. Like cutscenes in the 80s and stuff like that. As I said, it was a cutscene and stuff, and it was cute and stuff, but you could still tell it was a game. When you get to the
Mm.
90s and when you get to 2000 and stuff, it starts to even become like, oh, this is almost like a movie quality now. So the 90s were
Yeah.
really fun with that. The other thing that was quite interesting is I don't know why they decided also to do this in the 90s. In the 90s, you got a lot of live action pre-rendered cutscenes. Like really interesting. I don't know why that came along.
I have no idea. I think they were just testing things out to see because, I mean, maybe they decided the graphics engines that they had they're like, these are too real. Why are we wasting money on these things? Let's just pay real people.
Yeah,
Little did they know.
yeah, because I mean, like that's an interesting point as well. Like I'm talking the 80s had the latest disc video games and some cuts and stuff, but there were barely any like people being paid for an actual profession in video games when it came to acting or some
Mm.
sort of like almost acting or editing or whatever like stuff like that that would require cutscenes nowadays. So obviously, if maybe talk about the big names, maybe the Super Mario guy from the 80s, like the Super Mario Bros. Guy, that would be like an exception to the rule. But like even the more popular games, Ninja Gaiden and the Zelda games and stuff like that, they didn't really have voice actors. I mean, Link
Mm-mm.
itself is a silent character, even for being that popular. He's a silent character. He didn't have a voice actor at the time, so
Yeah.
that wasn't something they'd really consider. And now the live action rolls around, and suddenly you need actors, you need a set, you need editing, you need makeup. You have a lot of all of a sudden
Film
more
crew.
jobs. So
Yeah.
it was interesting, but it did also have a
Also
lot of effect.
terrible.
Yes, I was going to say that 90s, but 90s in general, it was known for like a lot of B movies. A lot of B movies rolled around in the 90s as well, with like really
Maybe
terrible
just
ones.
everyone wanted to be an actor, so they just were like, okay, we'll make some acting jobs. We'll just pull them out of thin air. You guys can act for whatever you want.
I think one of the like really egregious ones of this was the first Resident Evil game. I think had a really B tier, let's say, movie action scene. Very cheesy. That beginning, I think, of like all of them. I think they even stand in black and white or something. They're all standing over there watching a
Oh,
zombie or something
jeez.
rise from the ground or whatever. I can't even remember it that well, but I remember that Resident Evil 1 live action one stuck with me. Oh, the other one that really did a number. It's so funny to me. Like, I kind of love them in a way, but it's so funny. I think Command and Conquer is very guilty of this as well.
But
Very
Command and Conquer
guilty.
did it well. They like leaned into the B
Yes.
action, the B roll part of it.
Yeah.
Like it's a thing that they're putting into retro games again. Those Command and Conquer cutscenes. Ugh,
I do
those were
love them
so
in a way.
memorable.
I do love them. Red Alert was obviously the biggest
Ugh,
one. So Red Alert at the time
Prime.
had actually the biggest budget ever in gaming. And most of the budget literally went to the actors because I mean those actors were almost A-list at that point. It was the guy that played I can't remember the actor's name, but the guy who plays Omni Man and J. Jonah Jameson, he was in there. Tim
Mm,
Curry was in there. And there was also a very popular female actor in there as well. But
yes,
again,
that's
as you
true.
said, really cheesy, but the actors were great. He had that like I think my favorite line was still that Tim Curry one. I think it's like, I'm going where capitalism has never touched before, space or whatever, and he just like flies off to space.
Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad that it's good. They did it. They
They
did
did
it
it really
properly.
well. I don't know how they
Yeah.
pulled it off. but they didn't. But the other thing on the other line is like now with your live action and stuff, you also saw at this point a lot of movies suddenly became video games. You didn't have that in the 80s yet. 90s were
Mm,
almost like you did. No, I lie. You did have it in the 80s with the NES and the SNES, but it was like it wasn't good adaptations. Let me put it that way. The Ghostbusters, I think, was one that was pretty terrible, as from what I've seen. I think Terminator was one of it. Terminator was 90s, so regardless, still quite terrible. Like they didn't have good adaptations, but when the big
mm-mm.
studios rolled around, they started making better adaptations. You started to get, especially Lord of the Rings and Star Wars video game adaptations in the 90s. And because they're big studios and stuff already, what they did was most of the live action cutscenes were pretty much existing movie cutscenes already. They just put it in the game, and then you know the context. Like, let's say it's the scene of them fighting on Mustafar. Obviously, if they're fighting on
Yeah.
Mustafar, you know what's going on in the game. Oh, I'm about to face Anakin as Obi-Wan. You know what's going on in the game or whatever. Or if it's the Lord of the Rings and they're about to enter Mordor, you know what's going to happen. Maybe they have to
Yeah.
fight the orcs. Maybe they have some sort of story points, whatever, coming now. It was kind of emotional. But the other interesting one that I read was there was a Matrix game, specifically Matrix Reloaded. I have not watched that movie, so I can't comment on how good that movie is. Um,
Great movie.
was it a great movie? That's good to hear. But the Matrix Reloaded actually went above and beyond because they filmed separate scenes specifically for the game. It's very like literal entire scenes they filmed, but it was only ever seen in the video game. So you could have watched the movie and then you come and play the video game and you all of a sudden get more lore, more world building, more characters or whatever. And it was like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
answering unanswered questions.
Yeah, basically, like it can it can cover what the movie could not because it's also a video game. You have a way different way of representation. That was pretty cool, I think, for of them to do that.
I'm, I'm
Um,
just trying to find it. Is that the one, the Path of Neo one?
I'm trying to think now as well. I wish I wrote down actually what the name was, but it was
Yeah,
definitely
I think it's
I think it was based off of Matrix Reloaded. That's all I know.
yeah, I think it's the Path of Neo. I remember that one. That was a very good game. That was one of the first games. There's a scene. Okay, it's not a cutscene. This is gameplay now. But it was so close to the movie that you felt like you were playing the movie, even though it obviously looked nothing like the real
Yeah, yeah, like the real
live
deal.
movie. But it just felt like you were playing the movie at that scene. So I can see that they just it was like what do you call it? Like a spin-off, if they recorded those cutscenes for it.
Yeah,
This
it
would
is
just be
kind of
some
like a
spin-off.
spin-off. But I think it's like I
Yeah.
said, if you feel like a movie, they've done their job because now you have that immersion. It's also
Hmm.
in a way it was a level of immersion, especially for like I mean, if you're a kid in the 90s and you've seen Star Wars, you've seen Lord of the Rings, you've seen Matrix, and now you're all of a sudden playing the games and you get to watch the live action cutscenes, you're going to be immersed. That's their job.
Yeah.
Job done. So they know what they're doing, and they actually did
Yeah.
like really well with that. Um, the other one was also like I said, now Matrix already went above and beyond, and more people went even more above and beyond because not only did they film their own entire live action scenes, they actually started to build sets and like have entire shooting stages and stuff like that, or shooting days and a schedule all of a sudden. Like you'd never in the
Yeah.
80s hear of a shooting schedule. Oh yeah, we gotta get our actors out, have their trailers in the park, get a makeup, whatever, put the camera on them, we have to 7 days of shooting their scenes or whatever. You wouldn't hear of that in the 80s and stuff like that. But something like the Wing Commander series did that. They started
Jeez.
off partially with that, like they did live action. They first started off like doing live action scenes, but against a background that was like in the game, and then they like just have the
Okay.
characters like static face or whatever in front of the camera, and the background's fine. Then in Wing Commander 4, they had like an entire set. To be honest, it kind of also feels like Star Wars because it kind of like they're walking through like this whole kind of cantina, and there's a lot of folks around. Mark Hamill was in this one, but it's like
Oh, hectic.
he's
It
like
is
walking.
Star Wars.
Yeah, it was basically because he's walking through the thing, and there's a woman getting harassed, I think, by like a bounty hunter or a loan shark or whatever, and he's like telling him to back off and whatever, and he's like, you don't know who I am from the galaxy or whatever. So, but it was like not only shooting save stuff, now it's starting to use movie FX techniques as well. Like the shots, the way they're like capturing the things, the way that like they're starting to edit and do things. It's almost like starting to mirror movies now. They're now blurring those lines even more. One of the kind of techniques that leaked through, definitely in gaming at this point, was rotoscoping. Do you know what rotoscoping is? Maybe.
No, I might maybe explain it.
I'm gonna like
Tell
I said.
everyone. Let's pretend I do know, but the people watching don't.
Yeah, let's pretend we're trying to explain to people listening. Trying to explain to people listening using my very clearly copy and pasted Wikipedia because I forgot to change the font and I have to zoom in. So rotoscoping. I know it when I see it, but it's basically an animation technique that animators use to trace over motion picture footage, frame by frame, to produce realistic action. So, as far as I remember, it is like you're capturing, let's say you capture someone running. Rotoscoping would be to cut them out, frame by frame, cut them out, and then put them in a scene wherever you want. Whether that is now
Didn't
like.
they do that for like the Mortal Kombat, the
Yes.
original fighting poses and
They
stuff?
did. That was the
Yes.
point. Like they were one of the first ones to do rotoscoping. Like it's amazing because they obviously wanted to have the fighter stance of how he's standing or he's kind of
Yes.
just in an idle position. That was a mocapped actor, but obviously mocap at this point you can't do that in the engine. It would have
Yeah.
exploded because they had no RAM. So what they did was they did a movie technique. They took a video of the guy, they rotoscoped him out, which was a much smaller file, and they put it in the game.
Yes.
Obviously, also the other thing they did was a lot of those characters from the first one were obviously just copies of each other with a different like color palette, which obviously now is not a thing anymore. But like I mean, someone like Reptile Smoke were both just clones of Sub Zero with a different like color. Like all the
Yes.
ninjas basically were a lot of clones of each other. But now obviously they've grown into their own characters and stuff like that. But just the clever
Yeah.
techniques.
It's very clever. Yeah, it's very. And I mean, if you actually go and watch them doing the rotoscoping for Mortal Kombat, like even the kicks. What's his name's kicks?
Was it Liu
Uh,
Kang? I don't
is it
remember
Liu
my thing.
Kang? It's Liu Kang. I think it's Liu Kang's kicks. But they put the actor like on a pedestal so that he was lying,
No.
and then they kicked him in the air. And then they obviously just
They just
edited that
did
little
a bit of
pedestal
style on
out.
it,
So,
yeah.
yeah, very cool.
Yeah. No, like that was basically like the clever techniques and stuff in the 90s. Like they were in a transition where like we have more space and we can definitely shoot like live action things and stuff, but at the same time we don't have the film of a movie. Like we don't have that feature length.
Yeah,
So we need to somehow make a plan of all the stuff. But they made a plan definitely. But
I
as you
mean, you
said,
play
a lot of
Mortal
this.
Kombat longer than you watch a movie, right?
Yeah, that's also true. No, so a lot of the new 90s games, as we mentioned, also, we're talking about a lot of the good ones. A lot of the not so good ones, obviously, a lot of the stuff was B tier acting and stuff like that. And I want to bring this one up very interestingly because it did start something of a little, attract a lot of attention to gaming than it had before. So this one was called, I think, was it Night Trap? Yeah, Night Trap. It was a game in 1992. I don't think it was that big of a game, but it was also a live action game under the 90s that has a plot like this. It was a game where you have to protect a house full of girls at a slumber party from
I
vampire
know. I've heard
invaders.
of this game. I've seen this one. This is shocking. This is a shocking
It's
game.
a shocking game. Like I will say the acting is horrible. I was watching it and research for this thing, and I was like, I can't genuinely believe that was like the best take they had because I can't believe people could act like that.
No, it was so bad.
But basically, yeah, the premise of the game is there's some vampire invaders. You're protecting these girls at a slumber party using like Home Alone style traps, like the stairway falls away or the door smacks in
Mm.
their face or whatever. The problem was that obviously the media at this point had categorized this as violence and attracted a lot of controversy. Also, the fact that like the girls were at a slumber party and stuff, they thought like, oh no, it's not really appropriate. But
Yeah.
like I said, there wasn't. To be honest, they were overplaying it a little bit. There was very little violence in this, despite the characters wielding guns or whatever. There was very little violence in this. The most shocking thing was the acting. But
Wielding guns as vampires is just also
no,
like,
no, no. It like I said, it was terrible. But the ratings board started to step into this because they were like,
yeah.
listen, we're having live action cutscenes at this point already. Like, and now you have the ability to put violence, nudity, graphical content. You can put a lot of stuff now in live action cutscenes. We need to kind of step in and have some sort of thing. And I think that's where more or less the ESRB started to like look more seriously into
Yes.
gaming and stuff like that. I don't know, like it's weird to think about. Like I don't know if the ESRB should or the rating board should evaluate a game the same way as a movie, because obviously the cutscenes are like movies. So I guess you can say, okay, if something happens in the cutscene, you know, maybe you should
Hmm.
rate that or stuff. But again, at the same time, cutscenes are skippable mostly at this point. And the thing is, gameplay also, one person doesn't play the game the same as another person. So for a kid, when he's playing a game, whatever game that may be, he's not going to know the controls or anything, or he's not going to be that invested into knowing what the game does. So how they play the game versus someone obviously who's bought the game and they are keen on playing it who's much older. It's a really difficult topic. I don't know if they should evaluate the same as movies, but then again, at the same time, there are games out there obviously that I can understand. Okay, there's definitely a kid should not be playing like something like technically, although we
Yeah.
all did it. Technically, no kids should be playing GTA. We'll be very honest about that. Despite all of us doing it, no kid should really be playing GTA.
Yeah.
But it
No, there's a
happens.
lot in GTA. But I think it's because of games like that. Like you can't just rate one and not the other, right? So
Yeah,
you gotta cover all your bases because you never know. You don't want to be the guys that like, oh, we made sure that GTA was safe, and then they're like, what about Night Trap 2? You didn't even bother
yeah.
checking for that one, you know?
Yeah, no, it is
So
fair. It is fair. I kind of just feel it is unfair to like sometimes maturely rate games when they say it promotes violence, but promoting violence falls in the gameplay rather than the cutscene. Because I think that is like, but you can't do anything about it. It is what it is. Um, Not like that
yeah,
we listen to the ratings anyway, so it's just there for show.
that's yeah, exactly. The higher the number, the more people want to buy it.
Yeah, no, that is true. But yeah, so a lot of studios were going ham with their live action stuff in the 90s. They were loving this craze, and it was their cheesiness, their gloriness, and stuff like that that were taking over. But a lot of other studios were not exactly sticking to that trend. They were still sticking with the more classic digital pre-rendered like cutscenes and stuff like that. But they were also adopting movie techniques still to their own like that,
Mm.
and still creating really amazing stuff with the power of that. One of the most amazing ones I think at this point that was really really good for its time. Final Fantasy VII. That opening, I think it's the opening where like I think it starts off in
I
a
was
city.
waiting for you to bring Final Fantasy
It's
VII.
the one, but it's an amazing scene. I have to describe it
Yeah,
for that time. I mean, the city comes, it zooms in, zooms in, zooms in all the way to that first character. It like focuses on her, then zooms out, zooms out, zooms out back on the city, and then it zooms in completely on a different part, like on a moving train into the moving train.
yeah,
That's not that's not been done in gaming at this point.
yeah.
So
That's all animated, like
someone sat
computer
there and did that.
generated.
Like we're talking about probably people like yes, CGI at this point. Well, it wasn't great, but it was there, and people
No,
did know how to
and
do
that's not
it.
CGI.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
no, actually, that's true. That's not CGI because it wasn't computer generated. This was like some animator who did this. But
yeah,
I mean, that's movie or game. That was amazing. That's almost also 30 years old now. So,
yeah.
I mean, that is amazing for its time. But yeah, that was one of the ones that there was also some really other cool ones. I think there was a Batman Sega game that also had really amazing cutscenes. Not to that degree, but it had amazing cutscenes of like I think there's one also shot of like Batman's behind his Batmobile steering on it. Like first focuses on his eyes, just behind a cowl, and it zooms out, zooms
Mhm.
out, zooms out, past the steering wheel, zooms out, past through the windshield of the Batmobile, and shows them driving on a road. Really good cutscenes as well. That were starting to just letting play around with movie techniques essentially here.
Yeah.
It's like this is literal movie techniques at this point. Um, and then the other one, oh, wow, that image was really blurry. I can't even read what I said there. I do at least remember what I wrote down. Um, the other one that they did was the other innovation is like, okay, we have pre-rendered cutscenes, but now
Mm.
what if we can make it an in-engine cutscene, which means it's rendered completely in engine. It makes it easier for us with a lot of the files and stuff like that that we don't have to store separately. And at this point, it's also just very much easier for our developers to work with and all that because obviously it's all in engine. It doesn't quite clash with anything they have to put up. What do you think the first game was? Who was the first person to think of in-game, in-engine cutscenes?
Tomb Raider.
Tomb Raider. It is close to the Tomb Raider's release date, but it was someone obviously who was very loving of cutscenes. It was our friend Kojima again when they made that very famous Metal Gear Solid. The
Ah,
I think it was the
yes.
second one. I doubt it was the first one, but I think it was the second one that did it. First game I think to have in-engine cutscenes, massive for the time as well. For all those around,
Yeah,
they were cheering,
that
"Yay!"
was really cool because then, I mean, if you think about it, it's typical of Kojima to do something like that, making these
Yeah,
playable movies.
I
So
want
to
more
make the
movies.
whole to make the whole game never change from one graphical style to another
Hmm.
graphical style, which cutscenes were doing,
Yeah.
just you like never break the immersion.
No, that is true. And it's like, even though in-engine cutscenes were sacrificing quality, they did not look as good as pre-rendered cutscenes. They just didn't. But the thing is, that people have to remember back in the day, pre-rendered cutscenes, going from pre-rendered cutscenes to the gameplay was a very jarring thing at times. Like I just mentioned that Batman thing. Final Fantasy was good. I will give that a pass. But that Batman thing, I'm dead serious when I say that Batman was an amazing cutscene I watched, and it looked so real and stuff. You know what the Batman game was? It was a 2D side scroller where we were like shooting like balls and doing kicks. How can you have that cutscene of that game?
Yeah,
Like, there's a big difference, but that's what they did at that time. But
I mean, it still happens to this day,
yeah, it still
so
does. It definitely still does. I remember one of the biggest ones, but their games do look good at this point. But like one of the biggest ones that still do pre-render cutscenes is COD. I think
oh yeah.
the biggest one I remember, the biggest jump probably between graphics, maybe unless we're talking about the really early games of them. But like I think the one with the biggest jump between the graphics and the gameplay was Advanced Warfare. I almost feel like it was live action because that was a very damn realistic cutscene, if I remember that correctly. That was the one, yeah, that was the one of Troy Baker. I think is one of the characters and stuff like that. And Kevin Spacey, obviously, but I don't want to talk about him right now. But really, really realistic looking graphics, and the gameplay was alright. Like how the game looked was alright, but it wasn't like you could see there was a bit of a
Yeah,
difference.
chalk and cheese. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the biggest ones still. There are still a few. Obviously, there's nothing wrong like with it. Like I said, if you have the gameplay and the game to back it up, go ahead.
Yeah.
But as long as you can do that, it's fine. But yeah, the '90s were going out of a
Yeah.
big bang.
Interest.
They had like all of the innovations and stuff. Ooh, the '90s had one last thing. The '90s also had the first game of the QuickTime event. The proper QuickTime event, let's say. Like I said, the Laserdisc ones,
Okay.
like I said, it did have technically, but the first game with a proper QuickTime event was
God of War.
uh, it was Shenmue, which I've never played, but I know it's pretty
Oh,
popular.
never
It's,
played Shenmue. Is that the one with the girl with the purple hair?
it's like a Japanese, like almost an early version of a Japanese GTA, but not like.
Okay.
I think it's not
I
one of
see.
the like it's almost schoolboy or something like that, but like it's phased towards like a GTA thing, where like it's playing in a city,
Hmm.
you're in free roam, there's gangs or whatever. all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But
What
yeah,
was the what was the quick time event?
he should have written that down, but it was pretty much just. I think it was the fighting, to be honest. I think it was like
Okay.
you have to coordinate your fights. And
Dodge.
obviously, that translated well to every single boss fight after that. Because people were like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, we can have a cutscene of a boss fight and make the player play it?
Yeah.
That's innovative.
Fantastic.
I will
Keep
say,
putting that in games.
probably the best one would probably still be Resident Evil 4. I think Resident Evil 4 is the one of that knife or sword fight or something. Pretty good one. Really good one. Lara Croft also has a lot, but Lara Croft's ones annoy me because she usually is just on a random ledge, and all of a sudden you have to have a quick time event of the falling rock. I never get it on my first try, man. Every time.
Yeah. You have to have some super reaction speeds to catch those. Those ones that catch you out of nowhere. I
Yeah,
was supposed actually cutscene ones because you would be used to putting your controller down, right? You were like, oh,
yeah, I'm watching
cutscene.
now. Like I'm watching now, and then
Put
all
the
of a sudden there's
controller
a falling
down.
rock above Lara's head, and I'm like, oh well, my controller's there. I'll just set me back
I'm
however
dead
far
now.
I was. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Because there were no save. Back then, they always used to do checkpoints. Oh my god, checkpoint saves are the worst.
Although, yeah, to be honest, there's still some games when full had me on that. I think I forgot the studio's name, but the studio that made Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human. I mean, their entire
Mm,
game is also almost an interactive movie. Detroit Become Human a
true.
little less because like you still walk between stages, like you walk to the ship, you walk as Connor or as Marcus or whatever, you like walk between
Yeah.
stages stuff like that.
Through
But
the
like
towns, yeah.
most of the game is literally like almost an interactive cutscene. And like the thing is about that game is you have to really be sharp because it's not a fail screen. You just kind of go on. Like
Yeah.
that's what made it
I miss
terrifying
it.
for me because I'm always on edge. I'm like, I can't let this damn character die. Because I know he's gonna die if I just like, and he's gonna die proper. He's not gonna die as an oh you failed. Like no, he's going to
Yeah.
die, and my story's gonna go on without him. So yeah, that was also an interesting take on it. But yeah, my stress levels were not there for that. But yeah, 90s went out of a bang. 2000s came in. A lot of developers came out hungry, ready for more tricks, great techniques, ready to actually also push the technology. Because at this stage now, we're talking more proper technology. We're talking really the rise of PlayStation coming into play. The PlayStation 2 was, I think, 2000. So that was coming out. The Xbox was coming
Yeah.
out. The PCs were doing fantastic because they started to have these better graphics cards, video cards,
Yeah.
and that stuff. So we're starting to get into territory where a lot of the things goes on. And I mean, the other thing is the cutscenes at this point were also, like I said, I don't want to harp on about the 90s ones. The cutscenes in the 90s were great, but there weren't a lot of memorable cutscenes per se. Like there's cool shots, like the Final Fantasy one was a pretty fantastic shot, but there wasn't a cutscene. There was not a lot of cutscenes at that point where like it like hits a powerful message when it comes to a story, or it comes to a conclusion or climax, whatever it may be. Like it didn't have that impact yet, and I think the 2000s where that sort of binding comes together. You can like think of any big one that came around, like Halo. I think Halo 2's cutscenes were bloody amazing. I think that was
Oh
like
yeah.
2004. Gears of War had pretty great cutscenes. Okay, I'm going a little bit late, but Arkham Knight had pretty good cutscenes. The whole Arkham Knight trilogy, what they did in Unreal Engine 3 was amazing. Um, Last of
Yeah, but
Us,
this is when they shifted back to the no longer live action rubbish that they had. Now it was all focused on
yeah, no, that
creating.
this was now like okay, we've done our live action craze, we've had that little trend. We're
Yeah,
going back to we can do everything in the engine now, like Metal Gear proved to us. We
yeah,
can do everything in the engine. We're fine with that, and we have better technology. So now we can just pump these graphics up. At that point,
yes.
Half Life Part
Now
Two
it really
actually.
becomes a movie. Oh
Half
yeah,
Life
Half
Part
Life
2
Part
actually now
Two.
that I remember is like probably still the best graphics for bloody 2004 as well.
I mean, you
So
don't keep talking about a game for years and years after if it wasn't amazing.
or the fact that we're still demanding a part 3 after all these years, eh? So yeah. The other thing also that came around at this time was um, the fact that like not only the developer stuff can make cutscenes, but the fact that like we can make cutscenes in a way. And what I mean by that is we started to get this trend coming together called machinima. Like the short term for it is machinima. The machinima basically it almost refers to all cutscenes and stuff like that. But machinima is using the tools of the machine to make your own movie. But it's more geared towards the fans making a movie. So like I have a I'm using the gameplay and whatever, but I'm shooting it from specific angles or specific like narration or whatever, and now I'm suddenly making my own thing, my own movie. The biggest ones at the time was when Quake came out. Quake had quite a few of these. I think they were literally called like Quake movies or something like that. Where
Mm.
like they just capture gameplay and maybe even have like a play-by-play commentary or something, but they're making movies because they're like shooting at angles, they like watching the feed, whatever.
Yeah.
Those were the big Quake movies. They were quite popular. When Quake Arena also came around and stuff like that. And then you had the very famous series called Red versus Blue. I think that was the Halo series as well, but the first Halo, like had that Red versus Blue movie series or whatever that someone made.
Yeah.
Actually, I know who made that, but yeah. And then they made Machinima, the literal channel Machinima, got made out of this. Basically, people were creating
Okay.
all the video games they were using for cinematics, movies, whatever. And they said all these content creators, hey, all of your creative minds come together. We'll make the YouTube channel Machinima and have a good time until 2019. Then you die. But it was a good run. It was a good run.
Yeah, well, I
Um,
mean, like almost 20 years.
Almost. Yeah, no, almost. Almost. The other very
And there was a
famous.
lot of content that came out of that channel. So.
Yes, no, there was from various sources in various like styles, whatever. It was a good hub. It
Mm.
was a good hub. There was a obviously the most famous one at this point is probably source filmmaking. That was like when the developer Valve literally said, "Listen, we're gonna make an open source public tool you all can use and make your own movies using all of our assets from all of our games." They had obviously the characters from Team Fortress, Half
Yeah.
Life, Day of Defeat, all their games. Source filmmaking's in there. And people were making a lot of, especially Team Fortress. Is Team Fortress like almost
Oh,
dominated
yeah.
all of the cinematics you get now?
I don't know why Team Fortress was the one. I don't know, maybe it was just the time people were making dumb comical movies that
Yeah, because
lines
I
up
mean
with
it's
Team
all cartoony and
Fortress.
stuff like that. Because
Yeah.
Fortress has a kind of charm to it. Okay, they were also making Overwatch later on, but that was a different kind of movie. I'm not gonna tell you what website to find those on, but there are quite a few movies of those as well. Um, But yeah, that was the birth of machinima also came along. The birth of literal tools like Source Filmmaker and stuff was like not only giving developers powers to do more stuff. Because I mean, Valve also just used Source Filmmaker to make all of their cutscenes when they did that whole series of Meet the Spy, Meet the Soldier, Meet the Heavy. That was all
Mm.
done in Source. But now the people could use the exact same tool they did for their own cutscenes and make the same sort of quality for their stuff, which was very empowering.
Which is cool. Yeah.
No, it's cool when they get to share the stuff like that. Um, and yeah, that was kind of like the direction we went on when we went into the modern cutscenes. Like I said, everything at that point was like, let's make cinema quality stuff. We have the tools, we have the power, we have everything to our disposal. But there was one particular trick still left in the 2000s that was very critical to also cutscenes, and that was obviously real time cutscenes. When we got to that point, almost a tipping point where like our technology is now good enough to do this. We can actually render a cutscene in real time, depending on the game state of the game. Now,
Mhm.
despite obviously the fact that like this is revolutionary for like again for storage, because I mean, even a pre-rendered cutscene at this stage, like that wasn't done with live action, that could be rendered in engine and stuff like that, it's still in engine but pre-rendered. Like it was still rendered before, like almost at a compile time. Now that still meant like a ton of storage. For example, I think Neo, like I don't have a lot of a credible source in this one, but I think no, not Neo, sorry, Neo Automata, that game.
Yeah.
I think they said the size of the game, more than half of the size of the game was literally their cutscenes because all of the cutscenes were pre-rendered. All of those cutscenes, all of that audio, whatever else they needed, more than half of the game size was that. So at a point like if we have to have for a lot of our games these days, if we have to have a pre-rendered cutscene for the quality of games we have nowadays, like you'd you'd have quite a bit of enjoyment, hey? So real-time cutscenes.
Imagine Call of Duty with pre-rendered cutscenes.
I'm willing to bet it's the pre-rendered cutscene's fault that it's that big. It's what is it at this point? 200 gigabytes? 300 gigabytes?
Yeah, I think it's like 200 now.
How do people download that? How do people? Because the thing is, like, if you get bored of the game, you know, if I get bored of the game, if I'm like done with the game, if I feel like mentally, okay, I'm done with the game, I've had my time with it, I've had my fill with it, I can delete it. And then maybe
Yeah,
even at some point I re-download it again if I want to play it again. How do you justify deleting 200 gigabytes and then it's like next week you're like, oh, I want to play some Warzone. Oh yeah.
got to download that again. I think that's
Yeah.
when you quit Call of Duty, you quit it for life because it's too much of a hassle to
No,
download
like
again.
honestly, like it has to like it's almost like a rehab then.
Yeah,
I don't know how people do that. But yeah, real-time
yeah.
cutscenes really came in clutch with this. Save storage again. It also does a lot of other advantages. What would you like say like between your pros and cons, like when you think about pre-render, what do you say like what's the advantage we have over it as well?
I mean, it's again, I'm going to bring the immersion thing up
Mm,
because now you're getting, especially like RPGs where you have customizable
characters, yeah.
equipment and characters, like to have that look the same as when you play and in your cutscenes. That's obviously, it never breaking the immersion. Essentially, I mean, when you're playing a game and watching a movie, it's triggering the same sort of, I don't know, sections in your brain, that entertainment value.
Yeah.
So, and if you're watching a movie and your phone buzzes and you look at it and you break that immersion from watching the movie, getting back into it, like there's that cut in that movie.
You're
So like
breaking
having,
concentration basically, almost.
yeah. So when you're able to have like a real time cutscene that flows from here to cutscene to the next piece of the game,
Yes.
keeping that immersion there for you for the gamer.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I think one of the points I've written on, obviously RPGs again suffered. I almost said suffered. No, I mean like got massive improvements because of this, because of the fact custom characters can
Yeah.
finally appear. Like, it's not just like it's a jarring thing. I mean, you've played now with a custom character, you've dressed him in all his apparel. He's maybe even a completely different class, but now the pre-rendered game
Yeah.
decides, no, you're this generic guy. And so every time you're in a cutscene, you see generic guy, you don't see your own guy. And then
Hmm.
for some reason, he magically changes back as the game goes on. It's jarring.
Yeah, I'd see it breaks that. And then it ruins the storytelling because you don't visualize the character in the cutscene as your character. He's just whoever Jimmy Bob is.
Yeah, no, that's true. The other one, obviously, that's like it's a very simple thing, but even the state of the game is also obviously captured in real-time cutscenes. So
Mm,
even if something as simple as when you arrive to the objective you're about to do, and it's nighttime, you don't get that jarring thing where if it's a pre-rendered cutscene, you arrive at nighttime, all of a sudden, doop, daylight. When you come and greet
daytime.
the person, like, what was I doing for those past 8 hours? Just waiting around, just like standing static, waiting
Yeah.
at a shop front. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a jarring thing like that. Although some people, some developers really went like through a loophole for that. Because I mean, even if you think about something like GTA was a really funny example of that. Like you literally come to a mission, say it's Michael's house or whatever. You go to Michael's house, you shut the doors, and you'd watch the skyline go from like nighttime to daytime and stuff like that. And then it would like begin as pre-rendered cutscene. So at
Yeah.
least they did think of that. I'll give them that. At least they went through the trouble of at least animating a literal skyline changing like to daytime or
Just to
whatever.
get to the cutscene.
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
get to the cutscene. But then again, you still have to beg the question: did Michael just go to his house, take a nap from his very critical mission, and then wake up like 8 or whatever hours later? Oh, okay, guys, heist time, whatever. But
Maybe he needed the nap
he
real
maybe
bad.
needed a nap, big sleep before the big heist. So
Yeah.
the other thing, like I think this is more catered towards like a bonus for gamers, but the fact that we can create emerging gameplay from a real-time cutscene, which is not really possible in a pre-rendered cutscene. So what I mean by emerging gameplay, like a very simple definition is a game is basically bound by rules. Whether it's physics rules, just rules that the game has made up, whatever, it's bound by a lot of rules. Emerging gameplay comes from you combining two rules of a game and creating a net result from it to create a completely different new piece of gaming. It sounds way more complicated than it actually is, but like literally something like rocket jumping. Rocket jumping in real
Okay.
life is not possible. But we're combining two rules. One, the rocket has a blast back effect. Two, jumping elevates your position. Combine
Yeah.
them, and you suddenly can launch yourself 20 meters in
Super
the air.
jump.
And that's a completely new emerging gameplay that literally defined an entire generation of shooters. That's how important emerging gameplay can be in something as simple as what
Yeah.
Quake was or Halo was or whatever. So it can apply to anything. But like when I say about real time cutscenes, have you ever seen those videos online? Like they circulate a lot of the time as memes mostly, but like they'd say like I'm doing this real time cutscene like I say a super serious game like Red Dead, but now all of a sudden like behind them the entire world's on fire. Oh, this guy that they're talking to is on fire, but he's continuing with the cutscene, but his
Yeah.
face is like charred black and whatever. I remember the funniest one I've seen because Fallout also does realistic cutscenes, but for some reason the enemies in the cutscenes can still detect you or something. There was that really popular and funny clip. I think of someone was just like having a dialogue with a random character, and I think in the background a death claw was around. And obviously that death claw was in aggro range because you can see
Yeah.
behind the character they're talking to. The death claw is like slowly turning his head, he's like preparing a attack, and then he just charges, and you die during the dialogue. It was an amazing clip.
But that's great. I mean, yeah, I mean, it is mostly used for memes, but it's good content.
No, it is. It is, and that's kind of where the modern cutscene left us. If it's real time, pre-rendered or
Mm.
stuff like that, we're at a point now where it's very realistic. It's movie-like. It's also mostly resembling still gameplay, and if it's pre-rendered, the gameplay mostly holds up for its own.
Yeah.
Those that do not suffer for it
These
because
days.
they get ripped apart if they don't. But yeah, there's still a little bit of criticism that the modern cutscene draws, not just obviously, like I said, from the misleading part, but from actual people, not only in the business but also avid gamers. So these were three examples of people, interestingly, who think they describe the cutscene as being a cheap method of storytelling. They think it's because you're taking their stance is you use a cutscene to tell the story, sure, but now you're taking away from the player, not allowing them to discover it through the game. Like you're just using the cutscene to move the
Hmm.
plot forward, but you could have done it through the game. That's their kind of standpoint. Like I guess something I don't think Elden Ring has cutscenes, for example. Like you do learn the entire game. No, Elden Ring does have
No,
cutscenes
they've
after the
got
boss fights.
cutscenes. Yeah.
No, so
Yeah.
but basically their standpoint is there's better ways to tell the story than just like relying on the cutscene to like like play the game and then here's cutscene to put movie forward. Play the game, here's cutscene. Like they think it's an outdated thing. So
I don't know. I mean, like, just while we're on that,
yeah,
I feel like a cutscene puts you in a position where you have to experience whatever that plot point is. Imagine if the guy in Elden Ring, you kill him and he's telling you something
yeah.
about the story, and you're like, "Lol, I'm walking on, bro. I don't care what you have to say. I'm just going to carry on." And then, like, you just miss out on bits of the story because you've allowed the player to do whatever they want, and they'll miss out on it. And then they'll see further back or at a later stage someone hung around and heard of some other side quest thing that they completely missed out on. So I think when they put the cutscene in, it's because they're trying to get a specific point plot or story plot through without you messing it up. Because
Yeah.
gamers will always find a way to mess shit up.
No, it's
Can I
true.
say that?
Like I said,
Mess
we
stuff up.
have that's in our DNA. Now, interestingly, the people who
Yeah.
did like criticize us, the three people were Steven Spielberg, Kevin Levine, who
Okay.
is I think a story designer for games. I can't remember which games, but Kevin Levine's quite big. And Guillermo del Toro is also a big cinematic. That last name is very interesting for me though, because you do know what game Guillermo del Toro starred in as a guest role and that he was very much in love with.
Which one?
Death Stranding. Death Stranding is a Kojima game with 40-minute
Literally
cutscenes. It's
the
my
movie
favorite
of
game of all
games.
time, and I can promise you there's like 30, 40-minute cutscenes in there, yet he said, oh, he loved the game. It was a wonderful game. So, I guess the only person who can transcend this criticism is Kojima.
Well,
Man with...
Kojima doesn't make games. That's why he makes movies, playable
Exactly.
movies. It's
Exactly.
different. Can't judge that.
No, you can't
I don't
judge
know
a
if you were
movie.
going to bring it up, but I don't know if it counts as a cutscene. But
Mm.
when game designers started getting clever, and I feel like this fits in with like real time cutscenes, but loading times to hide loading screens, they would put gamers in a real time cutscene, such as going down in an elevator.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So it never like breaks. You don't feel that like pause loading screen and then
Mm.
resume. You're just in an elevator that you could even walk around in, you know. But what it's basically doing in the background is loading the rest of the game or loading the next scene of the game, which is
Exactly.
also a clever technique.
No, it was a very clever technique. I think I was gonna mention something else, but that's also just a very good intermediate towards that. But the most clever one I think of all so far, at least in like last 5 years or so, the new God
Mm.
of War is insane with how it managed to kind of, because the thing is it did that one technique where it probably also cleverly hit a lot of what it did, but the new God of War, like the thing is, like even with real time cutscenes, even with all our fancy pre-rendered cutscenes, and even as you mentioned with that whole thing of like trying to hide low screens and stuff, sometimes you still got that thing about a hard cut when you like converse with a person. Like even just walking up and talking to a
Mm.
person, you'd like have you walk to the person, the cutscene's about to start, boop, black screen for like 2 seconds, and then like it cuts to the
Yeah.
cutscene. God of
Even if they
War,
fade it, there's still that
they still
black
like that
screen.
break, yes, but God
Mm.
of War 2018 like did something amazing where the entire game is a single take, like it's almost a single cutscene essentially. I still at this point do not know how they managed that to make that like work,
Black magic.
because I mean that is insane. The fact that like there was not a single stoppage, regardless, like, but the only stoppage is if you die. That is literally
Yeah.
the only stoppage in the entire game, is if you somehow die. But no, I don't understand how they did that. And for me, that was probably one of the best innovations in a good five
Yeah.
years or so. Probably also why it won Game of the Year, because it did obviously do that above Red Dead 2, which was also a pretty good game for that year. But yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's because I say it again, but it's that immersion thing. Nothing breaks. You're involved. You're
Mm.
tuned in. You're connected to that game the whole time.
No, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. So yeah, that is kind of the stance we have now. We are well aware of what cutscenes do for us. I think most gamers like their cutscenes. They like watching the stuff.
Yeah.
They have know what to expect most even cutscenes, and game devs keep on bringing them. So as a final
I agree.
question, do you think there is anything that you could expect in the future of cutscenes, or is it gonna be more of the same?
I don't know. I feel like they're so close. Like, bringing up God of War, they've managed to, combine. If you think about it, every single
Hmm.
style of cutscene we've basically gone through in the past, where it will be you're busy fighting a guy, and then as you're about to swing that last punch, which you press the button for, it goes
Yes.
into a cutscene, and then
Yes.
his punch hits him in the face, or he blocks it, and as he blocks it, boom! Now you're suddenly in a quick time event because you're having to do this, and then it rolls into a different cutscene, and then it's a pre-rendered cutscene or whatever it is. Like, they've managed to use all the previous technologies to make
Really
it one
well.
new thing, you know.
Mm.
And I can't even imagine what more they could do. What more could they do?
Yeah, what more could I think technology? Well, I don't want to say anything because I know the power of gaming and stuff like that is like, you shouldn't doubt it. But I'd say they've reached a point where like the styles and the techniques they have currently are now maxed out when it comes to like God of War and stuff. There'll probably be new styles and techniques that come around. I
Mm,
think interestingly, maybe the one that might benefit off of this is the most is the things that like the accessories that we use or the stuff like that we use to gaming. So haptic feedback, obviously big one that they're kind of focusing on now a lot for this generation.
mm,
The fact that something like the controller vibrates uniquely now depending on what's happening, or dynamically, should I say, to what's happening.
yeah,
That could be something like they focus on to make that more immersive. Or maybe the fact that like VR, I think also is going to take huge strides. I think the biggest one for me that what was that Horizon one? Call of the Mountain.
yeah. I think it was Call of the Mountain, something of the mountain.
Yeah, something like Call of the Mountain or Song of the Mountain or whatever. But like the Horizon one, like it didn't do too much because it was a pretty standard cutscene and you're standing there in your headgear and stuff like that. I think the most interesting part about that whole thing is the way they can interact depending on your movement. Like I don't know why gamers are so
Yeah.
depraved, but it was so funny to see. Like, if you try to touch Alex, is it Alex? No, is Alex? Alex is a Half-Life character. What was her name again? Alex, Atax,
Aloy, the main
Aloy.
character.
That's her name. I'm thinking about Half-Life. No, Aloy. If you try to touch Aloy while she's talking, she's literally like dodging the hand like this. It's so funny though. So, like, I can't believe they thought of that to put in the game when it came to a
Mm,
VR game. But it was amazing to watch because, like, what those were people. What if, like, genuinely, if you're in real life, if you're having a conversation with someone, you do this, like, reach out towards them. Don't you think they would
yeah,
also like start to be like, "Whoa, okay"?
yeah.
So,
Well, I
oh,
mean, imagine if they now have to. AI is becoming popular, right? Imagine if they
mm,
have to add AI into this, and now suddenly the AI picks up that you're trying to touch it, and the cutscene goes a completely different
yeah,
direction because it's like, oh, what are you doing? You know, like
yeah.
what? Who's this crazy person? And then like the other AI guards are like, oh my gosh, did she become a crazy person? And now they're coming down at you like completely AI generated cutscene no one ever thought would happen, and now the story's on a completely different shift.
No,
Maybe that's the
because
future.
Ubisoft did that new is pioneering that new tool that what's it like AI ghostwriting one that's supposed to like help them write ghostwrite dialogue whatever. That might
Mm.
become a problem for strike that's going on at this point altogether, but we'll not digress into that. But Ubisoft is trying to do something with that, but like even I think even imagine like now the AI can like allow you to have a voice input to dialogue instead of like picking it off of a manually off of a
Hmm.
menu. That could also happen. Not exactly sure how profane it will allow us to be or something like that, but that's also a pretty unique way to approach a cutscene. The fact that like now
Yeah,
not only do we character the role player character, but we can speak as a character as well. I think is pretty big. So I think that's more where cutscenes are going to go in. It's going to start to implement more of our
yeah,
senses rather than just our eyes, our ears, how we feel, how we smell. If we have to believe the Sony one, this PS5, and probably how we speak. I mean, oh no, but like some of them, okay, they're implemented in the games currently, not in the cutscenes. I should point that out. But like a lot of the games, I played Alien Isolation. I think in the past week or so, and that game for
yeah.
2014, which is almost 10 years ago, 2014, it had not only voice detection, which means if I were to, this was disastrous for my because I was trying to record a video, but like if you speak, the hostile enemies would find you. That was
Yep.
disastrous for a YouTube video because I didn't like think that through and I had that on. And like they kept finding me and I got frustrated. I was like, how did I know I'm hiding? Oh,
Oh, you're talking. Yeah,
no, not only that, but motion detection as well. Because if you had the camera output, if
yeah.
I were to
The
tilt my head
move.
like this, I could peek around corners. Amazing for 10 years ago. But then again, that
Yeah,
was only in the game. But like, I can just imagine if you're starting to use something like the PlayStation camera, your headset or whatever to like start doing stuff like that for cutscenes. That could also be a pretty
yeah.
amazing thing.
It will be crazy. Crazy to think
Crazy to think.
that there's still more that they could do.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't like the regardless of like that's the thing of each generation. I think a '90s kid sat in the '90s and said, "Wow, live action cutscenes and gameplay. This is the best game you can get." And then you get in 2000s, "Whoa, the game actually looks like a movie. This is the best thing you can get." And like it just goes on
Yeah,
and on and on and on. So I don't ever want to doubt gaming ever again because I get proven wrong
yeah.
every time. But yeah,
And
that
then every now
is
and
yeah.
again they'll throw in a game that's completely
The
unrealistic.
opposite end of the spectrum. I didn't know gaming could get this bad. Could it get even worse? I was gonna say, like,
Exactly.
I think, like, if you go back into time, like, what are the people who had, like, that old ET game that they buried in the desert for Atari? They thought, like, oh my gosh, this game
Gaming is
is
over.
terrible. How on
Cancel
earth?
gaming.
How dare they release something so crap and then think we would, as a consumer, fall for that? Do they not stand for something? Something will improve in the future, and then, like, you come in the future and it's like, that Gollum game, Skull Island
Yeah.
game,
Skull
Mm-hmm.
Island, yeah.
Yeah, those happened. Those were definitely games that happened.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, that is more or less the history of cutscenes with a little bit of richness and wisdom sprinkled by us too. I do want to thank my
Yeah.
guest, Mr. Imagine. Thank you for coming out. I do
Thanks for
appreciate.
teaching me about cutscenes.
I hope you did learn something. I hope you did take a little bit of interesting stuff from it. And I hope for you guys that do listen to this podcast, that you guys will also learn something interesting today. And yeah, just think about how far we've come and how far we might still go. But until the next one, guys, thank you all for joining again. Hopefully, the audio for this podcast goes in as I'm about to listen it, but we'll see. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next podcast. You guys stay safe and we'll chat soon, eh?